Alrighty. So, like I said, we're just going to run through this, talk about a couple cool different things, honestly, to have this knowledge is power, especially as you guys go further into your training, not only private pilot, but if you go further than that, definitely, instrument, commercial, all those things, all this stuff applies. So, first thing we'll talk about is medical certificates. So we've already talked about this, I know, just in the classes that I've taught already. And I know a couple of instructors kind of put it into different lessons as well. So some of this, we won't go too in depth with it. You guys already talked about it. But again, we highly, highly recommend always, if you're going to start flight training, get your medical certificate sooner rather than later. You want to know ahead of time if there's going to be something preventing you from getting a medical certificate right away. So you have to go to a designated aviation medical examiner. We have a great one that we refer people to. So again, if you lost his information, if you want it again, you can come into Springs Aviation, call Springs Aviation anytime. We can get you the Dr. Jerry Limoges is who we typically refer people to. But you can go to anybody. You can also find other ones if you want online. You can contact the local FSDO, ask your flight instructor. Again, we always refer people to Jerry, but it's usually typically around $100. So sometimes it depends on the AME, whether you're getting a first, second, or third class. Different AMEs do a couple different tests. So depending on your age, also what kind of tests you'll need, usually it's about 100, sometimes 120, 125, 150 or something like that. But like I said, you want to know sooner rather than later if you have something that could be potentially disqualifying, or could something that is disqualifying now, but you could work your way towards getting it. So that's why we tell people beforehand, go get that medical, especially if you're considering the prepaid deal. Get it before you sign up and pay for that, because you want to know, if I'm taking XYZ medication right now, then maybe I just need to be off of it for 3 months to prove to the FAA, that I have medical stability without it, and then you can get it from there or something like that. Certain other things too, even if it's not medication-wise, I know that the AME we refer people to, he has helped a couple people. They were like the first in the country with, one of them had diabetes, and I forget what the other one was. But it was something else. And he was like the first in the country. Jerry got him signed off in order to be able to get his medical back and start flying again, which was super, super awesome. And it just takes a little bit more time is all it is. So having somebody that has your back for that is really, really, really awesome. Another really great thing too is I would highly recommend talk to your instructor, or talk to the doctor, the AME, before filling out the online application. Because when you contact your AME, you're going to say, I want to come in, I want to get a third class medical. He's going to say, here's the website, fill out this form before you get here, and then we'll go through and we'll finish it up that day. Well, if you have something that you're not sure about, so like a certain medication or something like that, or something that you might have been diagnosed with, maybe as a kid, a surgery you've had, any of those things, contact them ahead of time before submitting that application, because as soon as you submit it, you can't take it back. So they can help you, especially your instructor might be able to help you to a certain extent, but typically if it's something that's a little bit more involved or difficult, they'll just, refer you to Jerry or your AME, but they can help you word things a little bit better. So just, the way you might word it might flag the FAA, whereas your AME will tell you, oh, if you say it this way, it still means the same thing. You're not trying to get around anything, but you're just saying it in a better kind of way to get that. So going into some of the aeromedical factors that we can see in aviation at different times throughout flying, especially here, high altitude, or night flying, anything, in the clouds, we'll see kind of a couple different things. So we're going to kind of jump into this with hypoxia. So does anybody know what hypoxia is?
Not enough oxygen.
Not enough oxygen. That's correct. So there's a couple different kinds, but that's exactly what it is. So we are deficient in O2 in some form or fashion from something. So it really does affect you more than you would think. So on the ground, this can affect you in one way, but when you're up there, you're flying, potentially that could become a much more dangerous situation. Not only, your insides, your inner organs, but your brain, how well your brain is processing, how well you're understanding things, your memory, your judgment, alertness, coordination, all those things can be highly affected by this. So it's really important to kind of know this stuff ahead of time, learn this stuff so that if you get into that situation at some point, you know what's going on and then you know how to fix it. So some symptoms could be blue fingernails and lips, feeling dizzy or drowsy, headache and nausea, and potentially euphoria or belligerence. So at my college that I went to, we actually did a high altitude chamber. We had this whole flight physiology course that we had to take. And it's something really, really crazy to personally experience. I definitely did not expect it to affect me in that way personally. I guess I kind of expected to be a little euphoric because I tend to be a relatively, outgoing person. So I expected that a little bit, but it got to the point where my oxygen levels were so low and I started losing vision before I even realized that I was experiencing the other symptoms. I started not really being able to pay attention. I definitely got blue fingernails, blue lips, and they take a lot of like pictures and videos to show you yourself after the fact, so you can see like, look how long it took you to catch it. So it's really something cool to kind of see. Highly recommend, look up really any videos. I don't have a specific one for this, but other people in high altitude chambers. That way you can kind of see how they go through it. And then by the second high altitude chamber, we went up to a higher altitude a couple weeks later. And that time, like immediately I caught it. I was like, okay, this is what's going on. But just getting to see it the first time versus the second is definitely something really interesting. So an easy way to fix this is descend to a lower altitude, get some more, oxygen back in your body. If you have oxygen tanks, potentially, we don't typically carry those for anything really related to flight training, private pilot, anything like that. But if you guys end up going to do any more high altitude operations or potentially owning your own aircraft, something like that, you might end up investing in that in your airplane. But another huge one is not only drugs, but also alcohol and smoking. Those widely affect the amount of oxygen that you have in your blood and also are able to intake. So keep that in mind. That's also another great reason as to why we have that 8 hours bottle to throttle rule and why we're just making sure that we're kind of in that best state to go flying every single time. The question is the chamber like kind of like hyperbaric chamber? I actually think it's the exact same thing. I'm pretty sure. Maybe not the exact same thing. Because you can go both ways with hyperbaric chamber, right? Up and down. Expose you to pressure. Yeah, I think it's no. Yeah, it's pressure. Yep. Yeah. So it's hyperbaric chamber. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's a crazy good experience. I loved it. I was so glad I did it. They do the school I went to. They did all kinds of like corporate training and stuff. We did all kinds of not just for the school. They outsourced and did other classes with it too, which is really cool. But no trust falls while we were in there. We were sitting down, ready with our. We did try and do a couple different like baby toys, like the those little cubes with where you have to stick in the shapes. And in the group that went before me, we were watching from the outside because there's a bunch of windows. A kid actually broke it because he was so frustrated because he couldn't get. It was like a moon into the star shape.
Did you get belligerent?
I did not, thankfully. I got very euphoric. I thought it was hilarious. I was trying to do. They give you like a worksheet you're trying to fill out, and I was trying to do math, and it said like count from 0 to 100 by sevens, and I think I got up to like. Oh, I don't even know. Something really, really low. I was below 50. I hadn't even got, and I was dying laughing because I couldn't add 7. It was definitely an experience for sure. But so yeah, hypoxia is something you definitely want to learn about. You want to know exactly what it is, be prepared for it. If it ever happens, the big thing to note with that too is it can happen at any altitude. So, we see it the most at the higher you go, the higher your chances are, but just kind of keep that in mind. There's a couple different kinds. So the one, the high altitude one is hypoxic, hypemic. Does that sound wrong coming out of my mouth? I don't know. Anyways, hypemic, blood can't carry the oxygen. So this is actually kind of the opposite. This is where you have carbon monoxide poisoning. Histotoxic, the way I like to think of that one is toxic. So just think, alcohol and drugs put toxins into your body, right? So your blood isn't able to use that oxygen. And then stagnant. I just think of, like a stagnant lake or stagnant water where it's not really moving. So that's where your blood cannot flow properly. So this happens typically with extreme cold. And that kind of makes sense, right? We're not really having a lot of blood flow. Or excessive G forces as well. So this is probably, that aerobatics or things like that, kind of where you get into those situations. Alrighty, so the next thing is hyperventilation. So does anybody know what hyperventilation is? Too much breathing, exactly. So it's I don't want to say it's the opposite because it's not exactly the opposite, but this is where you end up having that excess instead of deficiency. So you're breathing in too much air, and you're just having it. You're losing too much of that carbon dioxide. Excuse me. So some of the symptoms that you'll see with this are kind of similar, actually, to hypoxia, but that lightheadedness, drowsiness, tingling in the extremities. This is one of the most common ones. Coolness and feelings of suffocation. So where you feel like you're not able to breathe no matter how hard you try, which typically will put people into a panic, and then it gets worse. So this is where, you kind of get into that state of, and you're almost making it, you can almost make yourself worse and get yourself kind of further into it if you're not able to just kind of talk yourself down, calm down, try and take deep breaths. A really big one that people like to do is like a brown paper bag or something that you can see the air go in and out, so that can really help you in like visualizing with your brain, okay, this is way too fast. I need to slow it down and kind of see that air itself just go a little bit slower. Some of the effects of it are uncoordination, disorientation, and painful muscle spasms. That's kind of the biggest one. So typically as you're excessively losing that carbon dioxide, usually it kind of contracts all your muscles, and because your body is kind of trying to conserve what it has left, and it can actually like bring in your hands, your feet, your fingers and toes, and kind of crinkle you all in. And it's really a kind of scary thing to see. So biggest thing is just trying to breathe slower, try and take in more oxygen, release less carbon dioxide. Really, you have to focus on that breathing and slowing it down as much as you can. One other thing too that some people use to kind of remedy hyperventilation is also to talk or to sing out loud. So singing is probably, I've seen singing and the paper bag are like the two most effective that I've seen personally. But because it forces people to kind of stop taking as many shallow breaths as they can if they're trying to like kind of elongate their words. All right, so further into aeromedical factors, inner ear and sinus problems. These are all too common. So this is, from sore throat to head cold, sinus infections, things like that. So the biggest thing to take from this is the differential pressure from inside and outside of your eardrum and the sinus cavities can cause them to either swell or flex, which is going to give you quite a bit of pain, depending on the severity of what symptoms you were experiencing before going flying is probably going to kind of coincide with the severeness of the pain that you're going to feel. I had a student, I've had one that was extremely, extremely bad, didn't tell me that they had a sinus infection. This was probably about a year ago or so, maybe a year and a half ago. And I had no idea. So we go up flying, take off like nothing. We climb at our normal VY airspeed, and then we level off. And I look over them, and they're like dripping sweat. And I'm like, "Are you okay? Like, what is going on?" I didn't even realize anything was wrong. And they were like, "I think my head's going to explode." And I was like, "Really?" I'm like, "Okay." Like, we kind of talked about it, and they're like, "Yeah, like I had a sinus infection a couple days ago, got some, and I just didn't want to take any meds for it because I wanted to keep flying." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." So a couple of different things that can help with this. It is not, by all means, if you know you're having any sinus pressure at all, or ear pressure, pain, anything like that, just do not go flying. Don't put yourself through it. You're not going to learn well. You're not going to enjoy the experience. I can guarantee you that. A couple different things you can do is try swallowing. So close your mouth and swallow. You can try yawning. You can try, like chewing gum, or like opening and closing your jaw, and moving your lower jaw back and forth. I haven't tried that one, so I'm not quite sure about how well that one works. But the most common thing that I tell people is called the Valsalva. So have any of you guys heard of Valsalva, except for you? Because obviously, you know. You guys know what Valsalva is? So plugging your nose and blowing out. So plug your nose, close your mouth, and blow out. You will hear, most likely, your ears are going to pop a little bit. So that's usually the one that kind of helps equalize the pressure the quickest, at least for me and for people that I've flown with that needed to relieve that pressure. If you're not able to relieve that pressure, you need to be very careful as to the next steps you take, because you don't want to cause any damage at severe cases, popping an eardrum or something like that. But level off and keep repeating those steps. Try and equalize again, level flight. If it's still not equalizing, then you want to go back to where you were last. So if you just descended and you started feeling that increase in pressure, then you want to climb back up, try again up there, then descend a lot slower after that and equalize as necessary. Opposite, if you had just, what did I say? That one, we descended. So the other one, if you climb, descend back down, again, try it the opposite way and go slower. And really, land as soon as practical. So just get yourself out of that situation. And like I said, it's not worth it, especially flight training. You're not going to learn well. You do not want to be in the air during those times. So that's one of those things that you just let your instructor know, hey, having some sinus pressure today, not sure what, might just be cold, might just be humidity, whatever, but just stay on the ground that day. Alrighty, and then like I said, this could result in a ruptured eardrum at those extreme circumstances. So just make sure you're taking care of your body as long as you can, as best as you can, because you don't want to get to that situation. All right, so spatial disorientation. When I say spatial disorientation, what does that kind of remind you guys of? What does that bring to your brain?
Vertigo.
Mm-hmm. Vertigo, that's a good one. Anything else? What'd you say? Space? Yeah. Zero gravity, definitely. So a couple different things that we can, there's different types of spatial disorientation, especially, in aviation, that we'll talk about. But basically this is what we're going to be kind of receiving from your brain signals to your eyeballs, to all your senses, what you're feeling inside the airplane. It can do a lot of things to you as a pilot, as you're flying along. It can cause you to feel like you're doing different things than you actually are, to see different things, get dizzy, get confused, potentially loss of aircraft control. This is a super, super common one before, kind of in those early stages of flying. If your instructor will kind of try and trick you, they'll try and do something to you that we'll kind of talk a little bit about here, just for you to be able to see it and kind of understand why we're talking about these things and what we're kind of trying to prevent from learning about it beforehand. So some big things that cause spatial disorientation to us is abrupt changes in pitch and bank and abrupt head movement, especially the two of those combined. that will definitely cause spatial disorientation in quite a few different situations. So some things that contribute to that is everything outside visually. So if you're in IMC conditions, so that's instrument flying, right? Basically flying in the clouds for the most part, or potentially under the hood. Really, in IMC, you're not seeing what's going on outside. So you might think you're perfectly level, but you're actually in a 30-degree bank and your brain isn't processing that. Or it is, but you're tricking yourself. So you're getting confused and you're thinking, you're feeling like you're in a bank, but you're like, no, the yoke looks level. I think I'm level. Things like that can definitely cause facial disorientation. Sloping cloud formations is the big one too. So if you feel like you're seeing the horizon and the horizon looks level to you, but you're in a 15-degree bank, it's actually because the clouds are a lot lower to the left of your horizon and they were rising to the right of your horizon. That's a really, really common one. And that goes along with also obscured horizon. It could be for other reasons, potentially fog, weather out in the distance, things like that. At nighttime is the most common time, typically. IMC and nighttime is the most common time we'll see spatial disorientation. So stars and ground lights, you can get those mixed up pretty easily, night flying. So you think you're looking at stars, but you're really looking at some lights on the ground flickering in the distance. And also prop flicker. So basically as the propeller is moving, you might just see it every once in a while, and you're thinking, oh, I'm seeing something else, or the same thing, just getting disoriented or confused. When we get into any of those situations, if we're feeling any spatial disorientation, the number one thing is to trust your instruments. And I know visual flight rules, student pilot training, we're going to drill into your brain, look outside, right? We're from visual flight rules, we should be looking outside and using everything that we see outside. But in these situations, we're going against what we told you, and we want you to focus on the instruments and trust the instruments. Try and maintain level flight and kind of essentially wait it out. Or if you're feeling like you're tumbling to the right, look at the instruments, hold level flight, and it will come back. Oops. All right. All right, a few different types of illusions that you could see. So inversion, Coriolis, elevator, and false horizon. So we'll talk about inversion first. An abrupt change from a climb to straight and level. So just think, you're climbing, you push forward, and you'll feel like you're tumbling backwards. Just try and visualize that for a second. So we're kind of pitched up, leveling off, and then you feel like you're falling backwards. This is one that is one of the most common, I think, that I've had students tell me at some point or another, especially like night flying. We're climbing up and they'll get that feeling like, oh my gosh, this is what you told me about. Like this one is kind of one of the easiest ones to feel, in my opinion. Coriolis, prolonged head movements, giving you the feeling of motion even when movement stops. This one you can even do on the ground. If you sit there right now and wiggle your head, wave it back and forth, and then you stop, for a second, you still feel like you're rocking, right? So especially out there flying, when you're not completely grounded, the rest of your body isn't moving, this is even more, obvious to your body, where you're kind of feeling like you're still moving. The elevator illusion. So this could be this is typically when you're going to get an updraft, that abrupt movement vertically. It makes you feel like you're climbing, and vice versa for downdrafts and descending. So that feeling kind of that you're getting in your stomach and in your body, you're going to feel like, oh, I just pitched up, even though it's really just the airplanes moving up, not necessarily just the nose. And same with going down and descending, you can feel kind of that drop or that lifting. And then false horizon, which I kind of already mentioned on the last slide, but couple different reasons, but we're going to feel like we're aligned with the horizon when we aren't. So could be those cloud formations, could be potentially not a lot of ground lighting, so it looks like stars, or a couple, fog or weather in the distance, couple different things. All right, the leans So the leans is prolonged bank, and it gives you kind of that sense of straight and level. So basically what it is it's that inner ear fluid kind of gets stabilized in that bank, and it tricks you and makes you think that, oh, okay, I'm straight and level now because I've been sitting here for a while. And then when you get back to actual straight and level, you feel like you're turning the opposite direction. So just kind of imagine like that fluid, you bank over, it levels off. Then when you realign, it goes like too far, it feels like. This one definitely is a super, super easy one to kind of practice, especially night flying is usually when I like to kind of show students this one. So we'll just kind of do a couple 360s, right? We'll just continue on. And then once we're really stabilized, we're doing some good, just level 360s, we roll out. And then almost every single time they kind of throw their own body to the left because they're like, oh, wait, okay. It kind of takes a second to kind of get to that stabilization. Autokinesis, staring at a stationary light, so non-moving light, gives the sense that it is moving. This one also is not specific to aviation. A couple of these, we'll see other places as well. But even if you go outside right now and you look, somewhere on the horizon, you find a tower, a certain star, you can even, stars especially, if you stare at it long enough, it's going to look like it's moving. Have you ever done those brain teasers? Even like sometimes going around on social media, it's like, wow, if you look at the dot, all of a sudden it moves in a, infinity sign or whatever they say, things like that. This is definitely part of, and as you kind of get further into your training, we'll talk about things such as scanning. Don't always look in the same place in the exact same, area of your vision. Definitely keeping up a scan, looking around. This is especially why that's super, super important. Graveyard spiral. So when the leans are experienced, the pilot tries to correct and turns in the direction of the original turn, and in turns, lift is lost. So to correct, the pilot pitches up and tightens the turn while in a downward spiral. So this one, unfortunately, like it says, when leans are experienced, this is when we actually do this to ourselves. Pilots do this to themselves because they think, like I said, you turn into that turn, you feel like you're level, you go the other way, and you feel like you're turning in the opposite direction. So you're trying to correct for that. Also, in those turns, we lose a horizontal component of lift, right? You guys talked about that with your aerodynamics lesson. That horizontal component of lift that we lose in turns is going to make us descend potentially or get slower speed, and the pilot kind of they think the opposite is happening because you're just really spatially disoriented. You're confused in this situation. You think you're fixing things and you're just making it worse. So you basically just put yourself in a tight turn and you're descending. This one, fortunately, I think, many years, in the last few years, I'll say, the FAA has really put a lot of emphasis on this to kind of try and educate pilots, make sure that they're understanding of when this happens, when we can fix it, how to fix it, and fix it as soon as possible to try and get ourselves out of it as quick as possible. So, or not get ourselves into that situation ideally, but definitely just knowing about it beforehand, making sure that you understand what it is, what the leans are, and just really trusting those instruments. Try and be as safe as we can anytime while flying, but especially in these situations where spatial disorientation is easier to kind of get ourselves into. Alrighty, somatographic illusion. So rapid acceleration or deceleration. This one you will feel almost all the time, even when you're looking outside. I think most of us will get that feeling. And basically, if you go full power, you feel like, instantly, not only does the airplane want to pitch up, but you have that feeling of going in a climb. Same with pull out the power, go throttle idle. Rapid deceleration gives the feeling of kind of that descent, like you're kind of falling forward. That's also what the nose of the airplane wants to do. But This one is super, super obvious. You'll feel it probably on your very first flight. Just think of taking off. We go full power and you kind of feel it kind of push behind you or push you back like you're going to be climbing. Motion sickness. All right, so this is a fun one. This is, I think, all too common in all aspects of life for a couple people. Some of us don't feel it at all. Some of us feel it, very often, potentially just driving a car, driving a boat, or being on a boat, flying an airplane, all kinds of times. So a couple different things about it. This is also with that inner ear. It's basically that like continued stimulation of the inner ear. So basically, kind of everything inside, the fluid moving and all that can kind of just add up to that feeling of, either nausea, headaches, loss of appetite, definitely like watering of the mouth, potentially perspiration, so sweating, and dizziness. Those are a lot of the most common ones. So if you know right now already, you get motion sick, whether it was on a big airplane you've flown before, car sick, any of those things, your first time flying with an instructor, let them know, because they can help you more than you think. Don't just know in your head, oh, I get sick every single time I go driving. I've gone on 2 commercial flights and I was super sick, but I'm just going to tough it out. Don't have that mindset. Let them know so that they can help you as much as they can. So, because otherwise it can lead to either vomiting. Definitely if you're PIC, your pilot in command, if you get motion sick, definitely could cause loss of aircraft control and potentially incapacitation. So those are things you want to handle beforehand. And there are things that you can do. So just keep in mind, again, medication for aviation in general is very limited. Or, has to be certain different, kinds, different types. So things like Dramamine are not allowed, but we have other things that we can supplement instead. So super, super common ones that I always tell people, ginger ale, even if you're like, I don't know, I did that as a kid, but didn't really do much. Drink ginger ale before you go flying. Take some ginger cookies. If you like straight up ginger, feel free. I'm not a fan. But little gingerbread men or something maybe might be a little better suited for you. Ginger snaps, something like that. Those are super, super helpful. Maybe don't eat, at least an hour and a half prior. I wouldn't say don't eat the whole morning. Otherwise that can lead to its own, kind of type of motion sickness. But, give yourself you'll figure out what works best for you, a timeline of when I should stop eating. But definitely there's a couple of things that we can kind of help guide you with trying, looking out on the horizon, just like driving, trying to kind of take it slow and kind of build a tolerance too. Even for me, my fiance, when he was a kid and his dad decided he was going to get his private pilot's license, he was extremely motion sick every single time they went flying. Like it was a miserable experience, but at least he loved flying. So he kept getting back in the airplane, but he grew that tolerance and was thankfully able to grow out of it. And now he's a pilot, and thankfully doesn't have those problems. So it's definitely something that you can kind of, most cases can build that tolerance to and make yourself comfortable. So some of the other things, I already mentioned a couple of these, but open some air vents, get that airflow on your face, looking out at the horizon, loosen your clothing or wear looser clothing. If you get motion sick, don't wear super tight, skinny jeans and a tank top or whatever, just kind of giving yourself like that room to breathe. Potentially, again, if you carry your own oxygen can help with motion sickness. That's not something that you'll typically do in private pilot training, and we don't carry supplemental oxygen, but it's kind of one of those, I guess, nice to haves if you have your own plane. And avoid unnecessary head movements. This is a huge one, kind of, again, while you're building up that tolerance, try and kind of keep things a little bit calmer, not really swiveling too much or, looking out each of the windows too quickly. And then if you are, if you're by yourself, definitely just land as soon as possible, get yourself out of that situation. If you're flying with an instructor, or, if it's like a training lesson, let them know so that they can kind of, talk you through these things. try and maybe distract you a little bit while getting you back to the airport, or, you know, finding maybe a little bit smoother air. Potentially, if there's really bumpy, rough air, maybe we'll, you know, slow down, maybe speed up. Kind of just depends on the situation. Also, another pro tip, if you know that you get motion sick, we have air sick bags. So let your instructor know ahead of time and carry them in your flight bag. In all seriousness, no shame. You got to do what you got to do, but we'd way prefer it be in one of our nice motion sickness bags rather than all over yourself in the airplane. So definitely, please, please, please let us know. All right, landing illusion. This is one of my favorite because it's not only at night, it's definitely, I think they're heightened at night in my experience, but this is day and night, and it's super cool because it's super obvious. So if you're used to a wider runway and you're landing on a narrower runway than usual, you're going to feel like you're too high. Just imagine you're used to this big, thick, wide runway, but when you're on like a long final, it looks skinnier, right? If you're on short final, it looks bigger because you're closer. So it's kind of the opposite. Rather than closer or further, it's bigger or skinnier. So your brain is processing that differently. So narrower than usual, skinnier, you feel like you're too high. Your brain is telling you like, I'm further away from it. Wider than usual, you're going to feel like you're too low. So the big thing with this is if you have BASIs or PAPIs, trust those things. You know, try and stay on glide path as best as possible because it's going to be different. The other thing is like kind of preparing yourself. So part of pre-flight action is to know everything about the airport that you're departing from and you're going to, you know, everything about the flight, right? So part of that, you should have looked at the runways. You should see ahead of time, okay, this runway is way longer and way wider than I'm used to. So this is probably what I should be expecting. Runway slope. So if you have an upslope runway versus a downsloping runway. So I think these kind of go hand in hand. It's kind of similar, but if you have that upsloping runway, you're going to look like you're too high, right? Because like the short final portion looks like it's like further away from you because it's downslope, but it looks like it's getting closer as it gets further, if that makes sense, just because you're kind of on that hill. The opposite goes for downsloping runway. So on a downsloping runway, you think you're too low because you look like you're closer to it, and the end of the runway looks further from you. So again, keeping in mind, knowing those things ahead of time so you can kind of prepare yourself. Also, definitely trust those BASIs or PAPIs if you have them. Follow that glide path down and be able to, you know, just kind of trust your surroundings, trust your instruments, keeping an eye on elevation. That's a big one too, knowing where you were just at pattern altitude, going down to which elevation to land, kind of prepping yourself with that was super, super helpful. Featureless terrain. So if there's not really too many super close to here, but definitely kind of, you know, further out, kind of in the middle of nowhere, I want to say, is where it's going to be the most prevalent. You'll see this a lot, but because you have really nothing else to compare the runway to, that's why you feel like you're too high, because you really have nothing to go off of. Here we have, you know, cars driving by, the roads, the hangars, other airplanes, the gas pump, you know, all the things you're kind of going to get used to flying here. Same as going to other airports that have a lot of things around. But if they don't, then you definitely have that illusion of just kind of being too high. Atmospheric conditions. So rain and haze, just think of you have a more limited visibility, right? So something's kind of impairing that. This one, I think, is more, we kind of end up making it like a little bit worse for ourselves because we kind of, you know, you're trying to like strain to see, you're trying to look for the runway, trying to kind of, figure out exactly where you're at. And you're actually going to get that feeling again of being too high. You're going to feel like you're higher than you are because you kind of have something, it feels like there's something between you and the runway. This one's pretty obvious as well. Fog, this one is probably one of the most interesting. but it kind of gives you an illusion of pitching up. So just imagine, not only, is it kind of that limited visibility, but everything that you're kind of seeing around you is kind of, it's harder. I guess it's just kind of thicker than that rain or that haze that you might see. And for that reason, it just makes you feel like you're having that pitching up sensation. So knowing these things ahead of time is super, super helpful because you can kind of mentally prepare yourself for it, but you're still going to see it when you go out flying. But just being able to say, okay, I look like I am way high, but I'm too white, too red. So I guess I got to just trust this. I'm doing pretty good on glide path. Just kind of keeping that in mind, especially when you go from here to Colorado Springs. I always, every single time, it's not even just the first flight with a student. It's like the first few that we go there, and they're like, holy smokes, because it's such a big runway compared to what they're used to. They're like, oh my gosh, it looks huge. It looks like it's never ending. It looks like I'm super low, and they're getting kind of all these illusions in one, which is just a really good experience and kind of cool thing to see. So you'll definitely see it every single runway you switch to. You'll be able to tell kind of this is how it kind of compares to the airport that I typically train at. Alrighty, alcohol and drug abuse. So again, I talked about this night one, right? Kind of intro to aviation and flying and everything. So we have the regs that tell us about alcohol and drugs, right? Our 8 hours bottle to throttle. Our drug use is very, very limited, prescription drugs. Anybody that is a crew member to the flight is who that's really pertaining to. But again, just us as pilots and being able to carry a medical, just making sure that you're complying with that at all times. If you fall out of it, then you need to let your AME know as soon as possible, and they can kind of guide you through the steps with that. You can always consult your AME if you're going to either start a new medication, stop a medication, or get diagnosed with something or anything along those lines. Like I said, they will always guide you in the right direction, let you know what you do or don't need to do. And the best thing, I would say, the big rule is, I know it says 8 hours bottle to throttle, but remember that is not just being drunk and going flying. It also counts. Hangover counts, all those things. So just really go from 12 to 24 hours is the safest bet. Just give yourself, you want to be 110% every single time you go flying. So just keep that in mind. Alrighty, carbon monoxide poisoning. So with carbon monoxide poisoning, how does anybody know, what does that smell like? Sulfur? Okay, maybe. Anybody know? Anybody else?
I think it's odorless.
It's odorless? Odorless? Yes. So that's what most people think, is that it smells like sulfur. You're going to know. The scariest thing about it is that it is odorless. Odorless, tasteless, colorless. So there's going to kind of be nothing to warn you until you're feeling the effects, except for in all of our airplanes, we have a little kind of like a placard almost that's attached to the dash that basically it's like a little orange dot, and it will turn black if there's an excess in carbon monoxide, which is super, super nice to have. Those are from AOPA. I know a couple of people actually that have like their own in their flight bag. They like to carry an extra. It never hurts. But that's kind of one of the only things that's really going to trigger you and let you know kind of ahead of time, unless you have something else, built into your airplane or something like that. So when we breathe in an excess of carbon monoxide, it's introduced into the bloodstream, and it prevents the red blood cells from carrying that oxygen. So throughout your body, right? We're not going to be getting it everywhere that we need it. Typically, the way that we get it there's a couple different ways, but usually it's the heater that is going to be letting in. There's like some crack maybe in the shroud or the exhaust, or something along those lines is usually like the most common, where we're going to be getting that excess of carbon monoxide coming in, and we'll start feeling the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning. Some symptoms you might feel, you might get a headache. That's usually one of the first signs. Drowsiness, dizziness, and could potentially lead to incapacitation quicker than you'd anticipate, and then unfortunately, lastly, death. So not only from carbon monoxide poisoning could that lead to death, but also if you're in an airplane and you become incapacitated due to carbon monoxide poisoning, probably not a situation we want to put ourselves in, right? So this one's really a scary one because it's colorless, odorless, tasteless. But again, this is not just an aviation thing. You know, you can get it from your car with your ignition turned on in your garage. You know, that's why my fiance, I one time did my auto start in the garage when we moved into our new house because we'd never had a garage attached to the house, and I thought he was going to kill me. But just things like that. So just kind of keeping in mind what the symptoms include, so that if you start feeling these kinds of effects, you can try and correct it as soon as possible. Get the probably turn off the heat, open the windows is a big one. Get as much oxygen as you can in there. Maybe start descending, getting as much oxygen as possible. You want to, immediately ventilate the cabin with the fresh air outside as soon as possible. What's really cool about the little placards that we have in our airplanes is they actually will return back to orange. So it's not just they go to black and stay black. So it will signify, okay, we're getting more oxygen back in the cabin. And those are by AOPA, I think, sells them too, which is cool. And then land as soon as possible and seek medical attention. So with carbon monoxide poisoning, this is not one that you just, okay, I have more oxygen, I'm good to go, done, forget about it. This is definitely one of the times you want to seek medical attention, call up your doctor and say, hey, or, go into the doctor and let them know, this is what happened, just want to make sure everything's looking good, because it can lead to adverse effects later on. So this is one of those really important ones. Go seek medical attention. Alrighty, effects of nitrogen. So this, especially to people that scuba dive, is kind of, we sort of touched on it. I think maybe it was maybe the first night, I don't remember, but a while ago. But just talking about, so an excess of nitrogen is if it's absorbed into the blood. That happens really super often when we're scuba diving, right? Going down, descending. You need to give your you need to give your body time to recover from this, always. So last time we talked about this, I didn't have the exact numbers. I forgot to write them down. I've never scuba dived in my life, so I just didn't remember what they were. But so some of the examples right here, for flights up to 8,000 feet, you want to wait at least, these are at least numbers. This is a minimum. Keep that in mind as well. Minimum of 12 hours after you went scuba diving, 24 hours after a dive if it required a controlled descent. So that's if you're diving kind of further down. And then for flights over 8,000 feet, always minimum 24 hours that you need to wait. So if the pressure is decreasing too rapidly, such as climbing from sea level to that 11,000 feet, then you're going to have that excess nitrogen bubbles come out from bubble out of your blood. So you really, really need to make sure you're taking good care of your body. If you scuba dive, definitely, this is something that I know you want to make sure that you are 100% aware of the regulations that go along with it. Talk to your AME about it. Usually when you go into your medical, they ask you, or have you ever scuba dived, or do you scuba dive? And then they'll definitely have a really good conversation with you about that. Just making sure that you understand like the full effects. And again, these are minimum times. So it never hurts to wait a little bit longer, making sure that you're kind of as safe as possible in that situation as well. Alrighty, fatigue. Okay, so, sorry. So this one, I think, for the most part, hopefully is pretty straightforward. So when we're tired, we feel a lot of different things, right? We're a little bit slower, maybe not processing as quick. Our motor skills definitely are not there to the full extent. So making sure that we are fully aware of how our body is doing. We want to make sure that we're getting as much, we need to get a required amount of rest before we're going flying. You don't want to put yourself in that situation if you're too tired. again, same thing, and we'll talk about it in just a second, but that I'm safe checklist. But you know, if you're feeling like you did not sleep well, you're exhausted, you're not going to learn well, there's no point in putting yourself through a flight that you know is not going to benefit you. And it's not going to benefit anybody you're flying with either. Not even just in training, but also as a private pilot. It's your choice to make sure that you're acting as pilot in command, even when you're not with your instructor. It's your job to act as pilot in command. We're teaching you to be a pilot in command. So we want you to be able to make those decisions, tell us, hey, way too tired. Along with that goes eating, right? Making sure that you have enough nutrients in your body, water, and making sure that you're kind of like just ready for every single flight. So there's 2 different kinds of fatigue, acute and chronic. So just think of, okay, I didn't sleep well last night, so I'm really tired today. Versus, well, I go to bed at 2 a.m. every night, and then I wake up at 6 a.m. every day. That adds up, right? So that's acute versus chronic. They're very different, but chronic is definitely going to give you those long-term effects where your body is just going to consistently be exhausted, and it's going to consistently hurt you more frequently, more often, and for longer periods of time. So you really want to make sure you're not getting yourself into any of those situations. Treat your body like its own temple, that it's going to be taking us out flying, and making sure that you're, again, safe as you can. So along with all of the things we talked about, our I'm safe checklist every single time before we go flying. So what do you guys know? What does the I stand for? That is correct. I'm just kidding. Illness. Okay. So first things first, are you sick? How are you feeling? Do you feel, you woke up with a sore throat? You feel great? I had a sinus infection last week, still feeling a little bit of it, whatever it may be. So ask yourself, this is, and sorry, I don't know if I mentioned this before, I might have skipped over it, but the I'm safe checklist is something we use every single time we go flying. Whether or not we talk about it every single time, this is your job to be going through this every single time. It's your own personal pre-flight, okay? So the M is medications. So what medications am I on? What medications have I taken? Did I take NyQuil, X amount of hours ago? And what does the FAA say that I need to wait? Things along those lines. So making sure that you are good to go, ready to fly, and legal to fly. S is stress. So this is probably, although it may seem like kind of one of the least important ones, this is probably one of the most important ones. How are you doing? Are you in the position to go and fly an airplane? Again, super cool, super fun. We love flying airplanes. That's why we're here, right? But it's tough. It's not easy to fly an airplane. I mean, over time you kind of get, it gets a little easier, but it's still, there's always typically going to be a stressful situation at some point that you need to be able to be prepared for and to be able to tackle and not kind of, overstimulate that stress that you're feeling. Alcohol. Has it been 8 hours bottle to throttle? Am I legal to fly? And also, am I feeling 100% clear of all alcohol and effects? F, fatigue. How are you feeling? Again, we just talked about fatigue, but making sure that you are good to go, ready to fly, feeling great, not too tired to learn, not too tired to be safe, and be able to react and as quickly as you need to be. E, so emotions and eating. Did you get those nutrients that you needed? And then also emotions, again, along with stress. These are probably some of, they're all very important, but these are the ones that are most overlooked. And, are you in that right mindset? Did something, just happen in your life potentially where like you just need a little bit of time? You need to kind of just, feel better about something, whatever it may be. This is a very real one. Alrighty, so that is our aeromedical factors. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yes.
You mentioned different classes of medical.
Yes.
What are they?
So different classes of medicals, what are they? What are they for? This, I think, is actually, it's in one of the ground schools. Do we miss that class? Or has that not come up yet? I think you'll definitely learn about it, hopefully sometime soon. But to kind of briefly go over what they are, we have first, second, third class. So your first class is kind of the like more difficult, I would say. You have more testing, not necessarily difficult, but that's usually the one where they do like an EKG and a couple other tests that they won't typically do for the others. Also goes along with age as well. Your first class, you have to get it renewed more often as well than second and third class. If you want to get your ATP and use that ATP, so like going to the airlines, you'd need the first class. For private pilot's license, sport pilot, recreational pilot, you only need a third class. And it kind of goes along with that. Some commercial privileges and those kinds of things will kind of help you decide which one that you need. So just private pilot, you only need a third class. But I usually tell people, start with a first class your very first time. And that's what I was told by my instructor, because if you can't get a first class the first time around, you want to know that kind of ahead of time. If you're looking to do this, as a career potentially. If you're just doing it for fun, then third class is plenty, but it's still kind of good to know whether or not you need to kind of maybe work on some things or talk to a doctor or something about getting a first class. Good question. Any other questions? Any people online? No? Alrighty, so before we take a quick break, I want to show you, and I might have closed it, so I might have to look it up again really fast, but, yeah. Okay, so going on YouTube, spatial disorientation, I believe. I'm just going to show you guys a few quick videos. I'm not going to play them just because, like I said, I don't know what's going on, why it's not working. But, I have to screen share. Sorry. Let me screen share to the other page really quickly. Okay, so this is just like a short little snippet, kind of like introductory kind of video into spatial disorientation. So spatial disorientation, oh my goodness, sorry. By TNO, this is a cool little clip that kind of just kind of introduces you to it. So it's only like 1 minute and 56 seconds long. For some reason, you can see it's only loading at past like 20 seconds. So I won't be able to play it. But the one I really, really recommend, would love for you guys to watch on your own time, is this one. Aeromedical Factors by ERAU Special VFR. So this is Embry-Riddle has really good video on aeromedical factors that I highly recommend you guys go watch. Again, it's 25 minutes, 24 minutes and 21 seconds. But this really gives you that visual aspect of all the things we talked about. It's a really, really good one. And then there's tons of other ones out there that you can find kind of on your own. Looking up, I think this is the one that I've seen, Flight Club, the leans. And there's really, on any of the things we talked about, you can find a video on it that will really help you. But Aeromedical Factors, ERAU, and Riddle is a really, really good one to watch. All righty. Does anybody have any questions now yet? No? Okay, then let's take a quick, let's meet back at, what time is it? My watch is dead, sorry. Okay, let's meet back at 7:15, and then we'll go over some flight manuals. dokie. So, second half of our class, this is, oh wait, I just did the same PowerPoint, sorry. Let's talk about it again. You guys better have all the answers this time. Okay. Like I said, second half of the class, flight manuals and other documents. So we're going to talk about a few things that are important to us as pilots who are, flying different kinds of airplanes. This information, it goes across the board, not just single engine land, not just private pilot or anything like that. This kind of pertains to everything. So right there is a picture of a 1975 pilot's operating handbook, operating manual, airplane flying manual. There's a couple different words for it. So this is what part of every single flight, we need to make sure that we have one of those in our aircraft that is specific to our aircraft in order to be legal to fly. So like I just mentioned, a lot of different words for it. Airplane flying manual, pilot's operating handbook, operating manual, operating owner's manual, a couple different things. So basically, this airplane has, this book has all the information specific to your airplane. So we're going to go through kind of the sections of what this is going to tell you and what information you'll find inside of it. This is developed by the manufacturer for that specific make and model of airplane. It's not individual exactly to the airplane that you'll be flying. So like one of our airplanes, 99243, there's not one specific to 99243, but there is one specific to that, I don't remember what year 243 is, but that, let's say 75, 1975, is it 85? Yeah, 1985, 172. Yes, they made a plane, but not a manual for it. They made a manual specific to all of that kind of airplane. Yeah, that make and model, just like kind of a car, right? They didn't make one specific to your license plate. They made it to your 2010, Toyota Tundra or whatever you might have. It will contain instructions on how to operate your aircraft safely, and it's a standardized document. Like I said, there's 10 different ways to say exactly what it is. All right, so going through the sections of that POH, we're going to talk about, so first one is general. This basically gives all that basic information on the airframe and the power plant. It contains the dimensions of your aircraft. So it'll tell you, like the length and of each wing, of the fuselage, empennage, all those things. And it contains definitions, abbreviations, and terminology used throughout the book. This one's actually pretty important because, especially as you're starting to learn, you might not understand some of the abbreviations they use, some of the words that they use. You can always refer back to here, and the most commonly used ones that you might not understand will be there for you. Section 2 is limitations. So all the limitations to that airplane for safe operation of the aircraft and its systems and the equipment. So this will tell you all the different limitations that that airplane has. It also tells you airspeeds. So you can find in there all the different airspeeds. It also says what the airspeed means. Like it'll say VNE. It means that's the V speed for never exceed, don't exceed this airspeed, in addition to the exact airspeed for that airplane. So it'll tell you the never exceed airspeed for this airplane is 140, or something along those lines. Huh? Sounds like your Kia. Oh gosh, don't tell us that. So the limitations for the power plant, so the maximum power settings that you can use, the minimum and maximum fuel and oil pressures that you want to have, the fuel grades that can be used for that airplane, and the propeller limits. So again, just going along with all the different types of limitations that we may or may not have. The weight and loading distributions, so this will tell you the maximum weight and your center of gravity limitations, all in there. Your flight limitations, which is your load factor limits and your types of operation. And then it will tell you placards. So information is going to be displayed inside or outside the aircraft. So all of that information you will find in section 2 of the POH, limitations. Section 3 is emergency procedures. This is one that I recommend to everybody to memorize. So not necessarily the entire emergency procedures section of the POH, but we do have emergency checklists here at Springs Aviation specific to each of the airplanes. I always tell people pick one of the 172 checklists that you most commonly fly and memorize those. So it's not something that must be done. You will have to learn to be able to kind of run through each of the emergencies and use your aeronautical decision making to make the best make the best decision that you possibly can. But in real life, in those time limiting situations where potentially you're 1,000 feet above the ground, you have an engine failure, you may or may not have time to pull out the checklist. But if you know it off the top of your head, you can run through the checklist as quick as possible, potentially get the engine restarted, right? So I always tell my students, please try and memorize the emergency checklists, at least for engine failure, engine fire, some of kind of the more time-sensitive ones. So in section 3 is where you're going to find that information. That's where we get our information for our checklists. And it describes the recommended procedures for different types of emergencies. Engine failure and fire, system failures, in-flight engine restart, and ditching the airplane. So all that you will find there. Also, our checklists you can find. I think Amelia is pulling it up to send to the online people right now. But you can find those online on our website. So you don't just have to get them from us here. You can print it out yourself. It's just a piece of paper that's super, super awesome and useful. But that way you have access to it at home too. That way you can be looking at it, studying it, kind of go through the process, what it's telling you to do. Just think about why is it telling you to do this at this time? Why is it telling you to do this? And just kind of going through the aeronautical decision-making part of that. So section 4, normal procedures. So this is our day-to-day operations. This is what we're used to if you guys have been flying at all yet, seeing the checklist. This is basically everything else but emergencies. Kind of all the pre-flight, starting the engine, run up, takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, landing, in-range approach, engine shutdown, and post-flight. All of those checklists will be in the normal procedures, section 4 of the POH. Section 5, performance. So this contains information about the average performance of the aircraft. So keep in mind the average performance, not typically what you're going to see every time, but it's usually relatively accurate. Mostly it's charts and graphs that you will use. There's a few examples that I'll show you right after this slide. We'll show you different stall speeds and different configurations. So you will have a different stall speed. For example, with a clean airplane, which means that your flaps are up, and if you had retractable landing gear, the gear up, and you'll have a different stall speed if you have the flaps all the way extended with your gear down, and other potentially lift or drag surfaces that you have. Takeoff and climb performance will be in here. So it tells you how long it will take you to take off and climb. Cruise performance, average fuel burn, and landing performance. Some examples right here. This is one of the takeoff distance charts. Keep in mind, if you could see right up, I should do this with my right hand probably, because I'm struggling. Right here it says at 2,400 pounds. So per weight, there's a couple different ones. Pick the one that is closest to the weight that you calculated that you will have for that flight. But just trying to be as accurate as you can. There's a couple of different things that you'll kind of use into this. And again, you guys will go over this in ground school performance, but there's different numbers for different temperatures. There's different numbers for different pressure altitudes. And then you'll get all the information along here. So if we had pressure altitude of, let's say 7,000 feet and it's 10 degrees Celsius out, then we can see that our ground roll will be 1,530 feet. And then our total feet to clear a 50-foot obstacle. So this is typically like something we're trying to clear some obstacles at the end of the runway, just pretend there's a 50-foot tower or tree. Then this is how many feet it will take to get there. So it's just one example. And then it also tells you up here, this is really important to note as well, the conditions. So because this is short field, we do short field takeoffs and climb with 10 degrees of flaps. So this is saying with flaps 10 degrees, full throttle prior to brake release, so you're holding the brakes beforehand. And this will be on a paved, level, dry runway. So usually this will tell us at the bottom, usually under here, under the chart, it'll say for wet surfaces or for grass runway, add X amount of feet. And then this is with 0 wind, our liftoff speed. So we'll lift off at 48 knots and then our speed at 50 foot. So we'll pitch for 54 knots. So all this information is in that section 5 of the POH. Here's cruise performance, very similar to how we just read the other. Conditions are up here, pressure, altitude, temperature, and then we'll go to RPM settings here. And this is the amount of horsepower. So usually I tell people about 65 horsepower is kind of a good target. We don't need to be running the engine at 83% horsepower when we're just on a cross country, 25, 50 RPM. We don't need that. That's a little bit excessive, just runs the engine kind of rough. So try and be a little more gentle with it. Same as takeoff, our landing distance. So again, conditions are here. So we're landing with full flaps, power idle, maximum braking, paved, level, dry runway. And then this one, so this one we have in, it says down here, this is the notes I was talking about that will be on takeoff as well. And it says dry grass runway, increase distance by 45% on the ground roll, landing with flaps up rather than at 30 knots, increase the speed by 9 knots and allow for 35% longer distances. So it gives you all that information. This is also very important to note. You will definitely get asked a question like this on your check ride at some point. Oh, and I'm leaning on this, sorry guys. You'll definitely get asked some question about performance and they'll have you calculate something and they'll add in one of those things kind of sly and they'll say, oh, it's a dry grass runway. You know, we're going to be taking off on, or they'll just say on X runway at X airport and they want you to look it up. You need to figure out how's grass runway and then kind of add that stuff in. So definitely always pay attention to the notes. Super, super important. So again, all this, yeah. Yes, this is all part of pre-flight. Yeah, we do. The question was, do we do this on the ground, not in flight? Yes, this is all part of pre-flight action. It goes into performance and weight and balance. So we want to have all this information calculated ahead of time. Also, you will learn very quickly when summer rolls around that this stuff is more important than ever because our takeoff and landing distances will definitely, yeah, they will go up a lot with just the high density altitude that we're feeling. The warmer it gets, the less performance we have. So savor all these winter days. It's the one good thing that comes from winter, in my opinion. Alrighty, and then I feel like I might be going backwards. I apologize. Okay, yeah. All right, so the landing distance. Okay, so section 6, again, that was a good question. On the ground, before going flying, this is all the information that we're required to perform legally to go flying, and making sure basically that we will be able, our airplane will be able to hold the amount of weight that we want, and that we have the weight kind of, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be equally balanced, but it needs to be within the limitations of the airplane, because if we overload either the front or the back of the airplane's not going to perform well, and potentially we could actually do damage to the airplane or, not be able to get ourselves off the ground kind of thing. Or back on the ground, even if you can't take off. So our empty weight will also be here. Our center of gravity, arm lengths, which we'll use for those weight and balance calculations, and our moments as well. Sample weight and balance problem is also in there. I always tell students, first things first, when you're going to do weight and balance, look at the sample weight and balance because it really kind of guides you through. So just in case you have any questions, and again, this is another part of one of the classes, so you guys will learn all about this, but all that is in section 6. So you will use this and kind of calculate this before every single flight. Section 7 is systems. So this is going to be all of your information on all of your aircraft systems. This is where you will find it all. So your airframe, engine, electrical system, fuel system, vacuum system, environmental system, landing gear, and braking system. So all the questions that you have will all hopefully be answered there. Every type of system that you have specific to your airplane, it will tell you right in there what kind you have and all kind of the important information on it. This will come most likely very handy in your check ride. I had my POH printed out that my instructor actually gave it to me because his copy was very fragile and was falling apart, so he didn't really want us touching his, so he just printed one offline, and I had it all tabbed out because just being ready for your check ride when you get to that oral portion, you're not expected to know everything, but you need to know where to find the information. So I had it all tabbed out really nicely so that if I didn't know any of the answers, I could pull it out and give the exact correct answer. So it's kind of one of those like really good practicing and learning tools, I guess, just to have. Section 8 is handling, service, and maintenance. So this describes the maintenance and inspections recommended by the manufacturer for that make and model. And then also describes preventative maintenance that a certified pilot can perform. Does anybody know what preventative maintenance is? What is it? You do it every day? So give me some examples. Changing your oil 2,000 miles before it's due. Okay, I like that. Huh? Oh, good. Not good, not good. Hopefully not in an airplane. Okay, car. All right, good, good. Okay, so some examples of preventative maintenance, and I apologize, I guess this is all the way at the end, but I want to talk about it now. So I'm going to skip through. All right, preventative maintenance. So this is part 43 describes it as simple or minor preservation operations that any certified pilot can perform. So the examples along with this: replacing landing gear tires, replenishing hydraulic fluid, replacing seatbelts, cleaning spark plugs, replacing fuel and oil strainers, So these are a specific list of items that you can perform on an aircraft. Everything else has to be done by an aircraft mechanic. And it differentiates between what an A&P can do and what an IA can do, the two different types of mechanics. But knowing for you as a pilot what you can legally do. In addition, it says when performing any preventative maintenance, an entry must be made in the maintenance logbooks for that airplane. So you have to describe what you did, the day you did it, your name, signature, certificate number, and what kind of certificate that you hold. So just keep in mind, if you end up buying your own airplane one day, any of you guys, making sure that you know what you're doing with preventative maintenance, making sure that you're kind of following the rules and only doing the things that you are legally allowed to do. All right, and then again, I apologize. I wanted to skip through to talk about that before we got too far. All right. Okay, so section 9 is supplements. So this contains any information about how to operate the airplane with optional systems. So this is kind of where there will be things that not every single one of that aircraft make and model will most likely have. And most often, this is kind of something that's added. So it's not printed in the POH, but this is like, you put in a new something new to the airplane, and a mechanic will give you like a little pamphlet that you kind of tuck into the POH or have to carry also along with the POH that's specific to that optional system that you put in or that you had put in after the fact. Section 10 will be safety tips. So this is going to be information that enhances the safe operation of the aircraft. So this could be fuel conservation procedures, high altitude operations, cold weather operations, and things kind of along those lines. So those like extra little tidbits that they want to tell you about for your make and model of the airplane. Alrighty, so aircraft documents. In order to be able to legally fly your airplane every single time you go out to the aircraft, the one I typically use is Aero, but Sparrow is kind of the Arrow is usually the most common one, but Sparrow just kind of adds in two other things that aren't bad to remember, because they again do need to be there to be legally flying the airplane. So supplements. So again, like we just said, if you have any supplemental information to the aircraft, you have to be carrying that. The P is a placard. So if you have any inoperative equipment or things along those lines, if you have something placarded, it has to remain placarded unless the mechanic signs off and says that it can be removed. And then Arrow, this is where we get into those ones we're checking and looking and making sure we visually see every single time we go flying. So our airworthiness certificate, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in just a minute. Our registration, talk about that as well. Your radio station license. So this one is only if you're going to be flying internationally. So we're most likely not going to have those in most of the planes you're flying unless you're specifically planning to go on an international trip. Operating handbook, operating limitations, owner's manual, however you want to word it. Again, this is the POH. This is what we talked about at the beginning. Lots of names for it. And that W is that weight and balance that you have to legally have computed before every single flight. So these are all the things that the FAA says that you have to have before you can go flying, and in order for the airplane to be airworthy. So to you guys, what do you guys think it means to have your airplane be airworthy? What does that mean? Has this annual done? Anything else? Basically, that us as pilots we're kind of certifying and saying that yes, this airplane should be allowed to fly. It's okay to fly. So there's kind of a couple things go into that. In order to initially be able to be legal to fly, there's a airworthiness certificate issued by the FAA, and they basically are saying that okay, yep, this airplane is good to go. It's good, safe, legal to fly and operate. Your airworthiness certificate, when you have it, it has to be displayed at all times in the airplane. So this is usually, you'll find it on the pilot side, kind of right by the feet, and there's like a little clear plastic, like almost pocket that is typically where they're held. If not, sometimes they're right beside the passenger side on like the inside of the fuselage, but always has to be displayed. And this never expires as long as, so like you mentioned, the annual inspection, as long as all the inspections are kept up to date, it will not expire. So in order to be airworthy, we have to have all of the documents. We have to be carrying those. Us as PIC have to decide, yes, this airplane looks and everything seems good, safe to fly, you're comfortable with it, as well as, and this is, before I get to the next thing, this is what it looks like. This is what it should look very close to, at least. This is what you're looking at inside that little white pocket or clear pocket.
Never is a long time.
Never is a long time. That's very true. There are a few exceptions, and I will go over those. I don't know if that's, well, we'll talk about the registration. But basically, as long as the PIC is deciding that the airplane is still airworthy, you will never lose that. So yeah, never is a very long time. But if you kind of fall out of the inspections, or like sometimes, I don't know if you ever see the old airplanes, sometimes, not here at Meadow Lake. I haven't seen a whole lot of them except for over by the houses that are on the other side of the field. But those airplanes just sit out there for a very, very, very long time until they're like on the ground with holes in them. That would definitely be one of those times where us as PIC would be like, that's not airworthy. And that automatically kind of disqualifies the airworthiness certificate. What's wrong with you? Oh, there's two planes sitting down there that are just. It's kind of. Yeah. Whew. PIC decision. Make some smart decisions. Good Lord. Some old airplanes out here, but a lot of other kind of small airports around. We're a pretty big small airport, but sometimes you'll see a lot of them out there just sitting. It's kind of sad. But So like you said, the annual inspection you brought up. A couple other ones. So Aviate, this acronym is how I remember them, how I was taught them, how I highly recommend you guys learn it. So a couple different inspections. First one, annual. So this is every 12 calendar months. A VOR inspection or check. This is only for instrument flying and if the airplane's going to be used for instrument flying. And that has to be done every 30 days. The I in Aviate is actually a 1. So your 100-hour inspection. This is only if the airplane will be used for hire. Our altimeter, so the A is altimeter and static system every 24 calendar months. Our transponder every 24 calendar months. And then your ELT, emergency locating transmitter, every 12 calendar months. So the way I remembered it when I was first trying to remember how long these last or how long that they need to be complete. So I just think of the months one. So annual is a year, right? So let's start off with 1 year because that's 12. And then the other ones are 24, 24, 12. So I just start 12, 24, 24, 12. And then 100 hour is 100 hours. And then the VOR is every month, every 30 days. Sorry, it is 30 days, not a month, but every 30 days if for instrument. The other thing to note with the ELT, if their battery needs to be replaced, if you use more than 1 hour, if it's running on for more than 1 hour, or if 50% of its battery life is used up. At that point, it needs to be replaced. Alrighty, so your registration. This is exactly what it looks like. Again, typically owners put this in that clear pocket right behind the airworthiness certificate. This is basically, it's just like your car. You're saying that you registered it with the FAA and it expires every 3 years. So this one is one that we're going to talk a little bit more about the limitations, not the airworthiness, but it expires every 3 years or quite a few exceptions. So 30 days after the death of the owner. If the aircraft is registered under a foreign country, transfer of ownership, so selling your airplane to somebody else. If your airplane is destroyed, if your U.S. citizenship is lost, or if you request a cancellation. So all of these things can override that 3 years, even if you just did it last month, these can all override it. All right, your minimum equipment list. So this is a list of equipment that can be not working on your aircraft, but your airplane will still be airworthy. So your MEL, it basically allows for kind of a deferral of your maintenance for things that are not essential. So it could be something kind of small, like maybe a light, something you aren't quite sure about, maybe static wicks, something along those lines. If you don't have an MEL, a master MEL, so an MEL, it can be obtained by your local FSDO office if you, like I said, if your MEL is not available. Along with this, not all airplanes have MELs, so keep that in mind. If you aren't sure, if you don't have an MEL, there's kind of like a list of other places to look to see if you're still legal to fly. So if you go out to your plane and you find that, X is not operative, or you're missing a static wick, your left strobe light isn't working, something along those lines, how do you know if you're legal to fly? So first, checking the MEL. You don't have an MEL, or if it's not in the MEL, then you can look to see if it is part of a type rating. Look at your airworthiness directives, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Look at 91205 in the regulations. And then, let's say it's not any of those, then it's up to PIC decision. It is up to you whether you think it is safe to fly without that piece of equipment. And then you need to label the equipment as inoperative. You just kind of placard it to say that you understood it's not operating and you're deciding as PIC, you're still airworthy, good to go to fly. We'll skip over that. Okay, so we'll go back to that last one, but airworthiness directives, just because we just talked about that. So an airworthiness directive is a statement issued by the manufacturer along with the FAA to correct an unsafe conditions. This would be like we put out the brand new Cessna 172 2021 edition, and 5 months later we realize everybody is calling us to tell us that the left main gear is for some reason, more weak than the right side. So if they notice something, they will send out this airworthiness directive and tell everybody, hey, you that bought a 2021 172, this is what's happening and this is what you need to do. So either A, you need to replace it, or B, you need to have it inspected every 3 months or whatever they determine needs to happen. So regulatory airworthiness directives require compliance within a period of time, and it'll tell you on there, you have this long to comply with it. And then there's a different kind that's urgent, which require immediate compliance. They are mandatory. There is something similar that you guys will probably learn about later, a service bulletin. That's not mandatory, it's recommended. So just know airworthiness directives are mandatory. 91-417 reg, it requires a record be kept of the applicable and current airworthiness directives, which is part of the required documents that make it airworthy. So you basically need to keep a record and make sure your mechanic needs to be recording every single time. Like I said, if this inspection needs to be happening every 3 months, they need to record every 3 months that they did that inspection in order for the airplane to remain airworthy. You can find all the airworthiness directives at rgl.faa.gov. So if you're ever curious, you can look up one of our airplanes and see, okay, we have a, maybe, I don't know, 243 is an 85, an 85 172, and you can see all the airworthiness directives that have been put out, and then you'll find in our logbooks, if you're, extra curious one day, check out our logbooks so you can see that our mechanic has put in every single time that he has complied with all the airworthiness directives. It's kind of a cool, one of those cool things to just see and experience and just give you a better understanding of what we're, what this means, what an airworthiness directive really is. Alrighty, and then the last thing for tonight, special flight permits. So this can be issued to an aircraft that does not meet airworthiness requirements, but is safe for a specific flight. So this would be typically, so let's say our mechanic is not here for a month and we need something to be checked. We could potentially get a special flight permit to fly our airplane over to Colorado Springs, the mechanic over there to look at our airplane. So usually it'll be you're flying somewhere to get repairs or alterations or maintenance to be performed, or potentially an aircraft to do a flight overweight legally with extra fuel over a large body of water or something like that. Because remember, we have that weight imbalance, we have those limitations, but potentially if you're trying to do something specific, that you can get a permit to say, okay, this will be safe for this specific one flight for this reason. If it's needed, if you need a special flight permit, you have to contact your local FSDO, Flight Standards District Office, and that's who you will go through to try and acquire one of those. Ask them about that. And those are all of our important documents and flight manuals. Does anybody have any questions at all? No? Anybody online before we lose ya? Okay. Well, I will leave the online people on probably for 1 more minute. If you guys have any questions, please ask and Amelia will pass it on. If not, then that's all.